I still remember the day my world turned upside down. I was working late at my restaurant, overseeing the kitchen staff and poring over financial statements, when a chance encounter breathed life into my dreary routine. Mark sauntered into the coffee shop, his eyes searching the room before they locked onto mine. I was taking a rare break, sipping a macchiato at a corner table. I knew I looked frazzled and worn, but he saw past that. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, his voice imbued with a charming timbre. His eyes sparkled with mischief and sincerity, an intriguing blend that caught me off guard. "It is now," I replied, smiling. My curiosity piqued. Little did I know how that smile would lead me down a path filled with love, betrayal, and triumph. We talked for hours that day. Mark was an open book, sharing stories about his childhood, his dreams, his career in finance, and his close-knit family. He spoke of them with a reverence that fascinated me, yet something in his eyes hinted at a shadow I couldn't quite discern. I, too, opened up, sharing my passion for cooking, my dreams of running a successful restaurant, and my childhood struggles. I glossed over my ownership of the restaurant, not wanting to taint our connection with the stain of wealth. As days turned into weeks, our relationship blossomed. Our dates were filled with laughter, intelligent conversation, and a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. Mark's gentleness and attention made me feel special and valued. But there was one topic we avoided: his family. Though Mark spoke highly of them, a subtle tension always crept into his voice. He would change the subject or become vague when pressed. My own family was simple, just me and my mother. My father had left us when I was young, and we struggled to make ends meet. My mother's sacrifices allowed me to pursue my culinary dreams, and owning a restaurant was both my passion and my tribute to her. As my love for Mark grew, so did a nagging suspicion that something was amiss. His family remained a mystery, hidden behind veils of politeness and evasion. The day Mark invited me to dinner with his family, I felt both excitement and trepidation. Little did I know that the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very core of my being. In those blissful early days, all I saw was a loving man and the promise of a bright future. I didn't see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, the brewing tempest that would test my strength, my dignity, and my very sense of self. But storms are often hidden by beautiful skies, and it was under such a sky that Mark and I began our ill-fated dance. A dance that would lead me through a world of arrogance, humiliation, and finally, to a revelation that would define my life. The seeds of that revelation were sown in our first meeting, in that sparkling glance, in that innocent smile. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The day finally arrived, a day filled with anticipation and anxiety. Mark had been hesitant to introduce me to his family, but after much coaxing, he had relented. The Richards were gathering for their monthly family dinner, and I was to be the guest of honor. I spent the day preparing myself, choosing the right outfit, practicing my best smile, and arming myself with politeness. In the back of my mind, though, lurked an uneasy feeling, a whisper that something was not quite right. The Richards' residence was nothing short of grand, an opulent mansion that reeked of old money and power. As Mark led me to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a lion's den. "Remember, they'll love you just as I do," Mark reassured me, his voice tinged with a hint of doubt. We were greeted by Lady Margaret, Mark's mother, a regal woman with piercing eyes that seemed to size me up in an instant. Her smile was polite but cold, her handshake firm but devoid of warmth. "Sandra, dear, how wonderful to meet you," she said, her words dripping with a sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. The dinner began with formal introductions. Mark's sisters, Janice and Denise, were as polished and poised as their mother, their gazes equally scrutinous. The rest of the family was a mirror image of privilege and pretense. We settled into the lavishly decorated dining room, and the conversation turned to casual topics. The weather, the city's latest news, and Mark's achievements. I was largely overlooked, a shadow at the feast. The meal was a culinary masterpiece, yet I found myself struggling to enjoy it. The family's conversation was laced with subtle jabs at those less fortunate, veiled criticisms that I couldn't help but take personally. "So, Sandra," Lady Margaret finally turned to me, her voice silky and calculating. "Mark tells us you're from a single-parent family. How quaint! It must have been quite challenging." I forced a smile, biting back my indignation. "Yes, it was a journey, but one that taught me the value of hard work and perseverance." "How charming," she replied, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "And what do you do for a living?" "I manage a restaurant," I replied, careful to omit my ownership. "A manager? How very industrious," Janice chimed in, her words a thinly veiled mockery. The dinner wore on, each course a new opportunity for subtle humiliation. They spoke of wealth, status, and connections, a world I was clearly not a part of. Mark was silent, his eyes downcast, a passive observer to my slow degradation. I played the gracious guest, biting my tongue and smiling through the insults, feeling a growing resentment toward Mark for his indifference. As the night wore on, I realized that I had been not a guest, but a curiosity, a spectacle to be observed and judged. I had been weighed and found wanting, a poor girl from a single-parent family who had dared to dream of a place at their table. The ride home was quiet, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Mark's family had shown their true colors, and I was left to ponder my place in this twisted dance. I had seen the face of arrogance and haughtiness, and it had left a bitter taste in my mouth. Yet something told me that this was just the beginning, the opening act of a drama that would test my very soul. In the quiet of the night, I knew that a storm was coming, a storm that would sweep me into a world of pain and discovery. A storm that would reveal the true nature of the man I loved, and the family that held him captive. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and I was left to wonder if love could truly conquer all, or if it would crumble under the weight of greed, pride, and betrayal. Only time would tell. The weeks that followed that first dinner with the Richards were a labyrinth of contradictions. Mark's love was as ardent as ever, yet something had shifted in the landscape of our relationship. His family's disdain had etched a fissure into our once unbreakable bond. I found myself invited to family gatherings with increasing frequency, each event a new stage for the Richards' subtle humiliations. They seemed to take pleasure in probing my past, picking at my insecurities, and reminding me of my humble origins. There was the charity gala where Lady Margaret deliberately introduced me as Mark's little friend from the other side of town. Her friend's laughter still echoes in my ears. Then came the Sunday brunch, where Janice and Denise ridiculed the dress I'd chosen, their words dripping with folks' admiration. "It's amazing what they can do with cheap fabric these days." Janice had cooed, her eyes glinting with malice. Mark remained silent throughout, his eyes betraying a helplessness I couldn't comprehend. How could he allow them to treat me this way? How could he not see the cruelty hidden behind their polished smiles? I tried to talk to him about it, to unravel the mystery of his indifference, but he would only brush it off, assuring me that they would come to love me in time. But time was not a healer in this case. Time was a chisel, slowly carving away at my self-respect, at my love for Mark, at my very sense of identity. I began to doubt myself, to question my worthiness of Mark's love, to see myself through the Richards' haughty eyes. I became a stranger to myself, lost in a world that seemed determined to break me. Despite it all, I clung to my relationship with Mark. Our private moments were still filled with love and connection, but they were now tainted with the shadow of his family's arrogance. I also found solace in my restaurant, my secret sanctuary where I could be myself, where I could create and thrive without judgment. It was a world apart from the Richards' twisted games, a world where I was respected and valued. But even in that haven, I couldn't escape the creeping feeling that I was living a lie, that I was allowing myself to be treated as less than I was. I knew that something had to change, that I had to find the strength to confront the storm that was brewing. I began to see Mark's family for what they were: greedy, arrogant, and hypocritical. They were masters of manipulation, experts in the art of deception, wolves in sheep's clothing. And Mark, my dear Mark, was their puppet, a weak, spineless man who dared not go against their will. As the days turned into weeks, The pattern of disdain became a relentless cycle, a never-ending dance of humiliation and betrayal. I knew that I was nearing my breaking point, that the time had come to take control of my destiny. I began to plan, to prepare for the confrontation that was inevitable. I knew that it would not be easy, that it would require all my strength, my courage, and my self-respect. But I was ready! Ready to face the storm, ready to reclaim my life, ready to become the woman I was meant to be. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the final act was about to begin. In my heart, I knew that the time had come to stand up for myself, to break free from the chains of the Richards' arrogance, to find my voice and my dignity. The battle had begun, and I was ready to fight. For myself, for my love, for my very soul. It was time to face the storm. It was time to rise. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a delicately penned calligraphy announcing a family party at a renowned restaurant in town. Mark's eyes danced with excitement as he handed it to me, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to be unleashed. I smiled, a smile that hid a torrent of emotion, as I realized that fate had dealt me an incredible hand. The restaurant they had chosen for their grand family gathering was none other than mine. It was the opportunity I had been waiting for, a chance to seize control of the narrative, to turn the tables on the Richards, to show them that I was not to be trifled with. I accepted the invitation with feigned enthusiasm, my mind already whirring with plans and possibilities. The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind of preparation, both mentally and physically. I briefed my staff, ensuring that they understood the importance of the evening and the role they would play in my carefully crafted scheme. I also spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing my words, my expressions, my resolve. I knew that this would be a battle of wills, and I was determined to be the victor. Mark was blissfully ignorant, his thoughts consumed with the happiness of the occasion, the joy of bringing together the two worlds he loved. I played along, my love for him, a confusing mix of anger, disappointment, and longing. I knew that he was a victim of his family's manipulation, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed me in some fundamental way. The night of the gathering arrived, a night filled with expectation and uncertainty. I dressed with meticulous care, choosing an elegant gown that spoke of grace and confidence. As Mark and I made our way to the restaurant, I could feel the storm building within me, a tempest of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. The restaurant was a vision of sophistication and elegance, a perfect setting for the drama that was about to unfold. The Richards were already there, their faces aglow with smug satisfaction, their eyes scanning the room with an air of ownership. They greeted us with their usual arrogance, their words a thin veneer of politeness that did little to hide their contempt. Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed with practiced ease, a symphony of insincerity and pretense. I played my part, smiling and nodding, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the meal progressed, the Richards became bolder, their comments more cutting, their laughter more mocking. I could feel the storm within me growing, the thunder of my anger, the lightning of my resolve. I watched as they tore into me, their words a barrage of insults and insinuations, their eyes gleaming with malice. And then it happened. Lady Margaret, her face flushed with wine and arrogance, turned me with a sneer, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sandra, my dear, I must say that you are completely unworthy of my son. You're nothing but a poor girl from a single-parent family, and I simply cannot allow my son to degrade himself by marrying you. Mark, break it off. This farce has gone on long enough." The room went still, the air thick with shock and disbelief. Mark's face went white, his eyes wide with horror, his voice a strangled whisper. "Mother, what are you saying?" I looked at him, my heart aching for his pain, yet knowing that this was the moment I had been waiting for. I stood, my body trembling with righteous anger, my voice clear and strong. "Lady Margaret, I thank you for your honesty, but I must correct you on one thing. You see, this is not just any restaurant. This is my restaurant. This is my restaurant, and I will not sit at the same table with people who think so little of me." I turned to my staff, who were standing by, ready to act. "Please escort these people out." They are no longer welcome here." The Richards were stunned, their faces pale with shock, their mouths agape. I watched as they were led out, their arrogance replaced with humiliation, their power stripped away. I turned to Mark, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "I'm sorry, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I cannot marry a man who allows his family to treat me this way." I walked out, leaving him behind, my heart heavy with grief, but my soul ablaze with triumph. The storm had been unleashed, and I had emerged victorious. But at what cost? The night was dark and somber as I made my way home, the streets echoing with the silence of my solitude. The events of the evening were a whirlwind in my mind, a chaos of emotion and revelation. I had done it. I had stood up to the Richards, faced them down, reclaimed my dignity. I had shown them that I was not a pawn in their twisted game, that I was a woman of strength and self-respect. Yet the victory was bittersweet, tinged with the pain of losing Mark, the man I had once believed to be the love of my life. I knew that I had done the right thing, that I had chosen myself over a relationship that was toxic and demeaning. But the loss was real, the void in my heart a gaping wound. I spent the night in restless contemplation, replaying the evening's events, wrestling with my feelings of triumph and loss. I knew that the storm was not over, that the Richards would not go quietly into the night. They were people of influence and power, people who would not take kindly to being humiliated. But I was ready for whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I was strong, that I was worthy, that I had faced my demons and emerged victorious. The morning brought with it a new sense of clarity, a determination to move forward, to rebuild my life without the shadow of the Richards. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of the restaurant, the camaraderie of my staff, the joy of creating something beautiful and nourishing. Days turned into weeks, and the world continued to spin, the storm of that night slowly receding into memory. But the Richards were not done with me. One bright and chilly morning, a knock on my door broke the tranquility of my solitude. I opened it to find Mark's mother, Lady Margaret, standing on my doorstep, her face a mask of contrition, her eyes pleading. "Sandra," she began, her voice trembling, "we've come to apologize." I looked past her to see Mark, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and despair. I felt a pang of sympathy, a longing to comfort him, to forgive him. But I knew that I could not, that I must not. I listened as Lady Margaret spoke, her words a carefully crafted dance of apology and manipulation. "We were wrong, Sandra. We see that now. We want to make amends, to welcome you into our family." Her eyes flicked to Mark, a subtle signal that I did not miss. I looked at him, seeing the boy I had once loved, the man I had once believed in. But I also saw the weakness, the lack of resolve, the inability to stand up for what was right. I knew then that I could never go back, that the bridge had been burned, that the love we had once shared was now a ghost of the past. I reached into my purse, pulling out a wad of bills, my eyes never leaving Lady Margaret's. "Here," I said, my voice cold and firm. "Take this and stay out of my sight." I watched as she picked up the money, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. I closed the door, my heart heavy with the finality of the moment. I knew that I had done the right thing, that I had chosen myself over a relationship that was never meant to be. But the pain was real, the loss profound. I had weathered the storm, emerged stronger and wiser, but I was changed, scarred by the battle, forever altered by the choices I had made. I looked out the window, watching as the Richards drove away, a chapter of my life closing, a new one beginning. I knew that I was ready for whatever came next, armed with the strength of my convictions, the knowledge of my worth, the courage of my choices. I was free, unburdened by the weight of the past, ready to face the future with a heart full of hope and a soul full of fire. The storm had passed, and I was reborn.